Hello again everyone! So today's video is going to be all about Mythic Plus changes, additions and omissions in Shadowlands. Mythic Plus has gone quite a long way since its addition back in Legion. It's been through quite a few different iterations from how the affixes work, what level they're introduced at, right down to how the end of dungeon chest functions. Remember how in its first iteration, 3 chesting a run literally meant you got 3 chests with potential loot chances regardless of level? So, let's start off with what's getting added. First up, we have 3 brand new baseline affixes. These are Storming, Inspiring, and Spiteful. What do they do? Well, Storming seems to function quite similar to how the adds in King's Rest and Shrine of the Storms do, where they spawn mini tornadoes that knock you back and deal damage. They'll spawn randomly around mobs while you're in combat with them. This sounds like it could be quite annoying for melee in particular, due to it spawning around the mobs themselves. However, this would really depend on the dungeon layouts. Open areas and dungeons should make this quite easy to deal with, while closed spaces could make it a lot more harder and annoying. As for Inspiring, remember in 8.2 we had those Ajara emissaries, and the Tides emissary had an effect that made all of the mobs around it immune to CC until it died? Yeah, it's basically the same as that. A mob at complete random will gain Inspiring Presence, which will make all of the other mobs around it CC immune. The mob with Inspiring Presence is going to have a gold glow around its feet, which should make it easier to identify and target. This affix's annoyances is pretty subjective to how the dungeon functions. If the other mobs hit really hard or have some form of complex mechanic, then it could be pretty painful to deal with. However, if they have pretty basic mechanics or don't hit too hard, then it won't be that bad. Another factor is going to be the mobs that are actually given the Inspiring Presence. If it is truly random and can go on any mob in the dungeon, instead of a set list and being picked from that list, then it could be quite annoying if that mob has a lot of HP. If it doesn't have too much though, it shouldn't be too bad. You could also just decide to CC them and pull the pack away, which also seems to work. Lastly of the 3 is Spiteful. So this affix is really similar to the Things of Beyond mob you get when you go over 40 corruption. Once any mob dies, a Spiteful Shade is going to appear and will then fixate a player at complete random and chase them until the shade dies. It has a debuff that will make it take 8% of its health and damage every second, so it'll take about 12 to 13 seconds to die if left completely untouched. However, it appears to have around 100k health, which then scales depending on your key level, so it can be killed early. It only does melee attacks, and these attacks hit about 3 times harder than other mobs, and this damage also scales with key level. It can also be CC'd, which can also be really useful. So that's it for the baseline affixes that are being added. They definitely could have some potential, but could also pose some annoyances if the dungeons aren't tweaked and scaled accordingly. So another new addition in Mythic Plus is of course the new seasonal affix. So the first seasonal affix of Shadowlands is Prideful. So what is Prideful exactly? Well, it's quite similar to Reaping from 8.1. Except, instead of spawning all of the adds you killed up until certain intervals, it spawns a single add. This add is spawned after players collect a certain amount of pride. Pride is gained by just defeating non-boss enemies, so supposedly it will be just at set intervals as well, such as every 20% for example. At these intervals, all pride is then absorbed from all players and manifests into the add. It does say it increases its health by 100% and damage by 25% per pride absorbed, so perhaps there might be a way to reduce this effect, or maybe it's just a flavor tooltip. It also looks as if the prideful creature has a spell called Overflowing Pride. This seems to do shadow damage to any players within 60 yards every 2 seconds, and the damage is increased by 40% for each time this is cast. This add then explodes on death, dealing 100% of its health as shadow damage split amongst everything within 8 yards, as well as stunning them for 4 seconds. Now, the wording here is quite interesting, because it says it deals damage to everything within 8 yards, so perhaps you can get creative here and use it to damage trash packs, or it could just be some bad wording from Blizzard. I suppose we'll have to wait and see. Once the prideful creature is then defeated, all players become prideful themselves and have increased damage by 30% and movement speed by 60% for 1 minute. This could be quite useful to time for certain bosses or packs, making it a lot easier to defeat them. So, that's everything so far about Prideful. I think this could be quite a fun affix to play around with, and it could be quite interesting with the damage buff, as well as potentially turning the add into a bomb on death to clear out some really nasty packs. That does it for all of the affixes being added, but I did also mention some omissions, so what's being removed? It seems like there are 2 of the old affixes that have been removed, and these are Skittish and Teeming. These did make some old weeks quite relaxed and laid back, so that could have been why they have been removed. Skittish literally just reduces tank threat, which has no real effect at all, so it's basically a null affix. It is nice to have though, as it makes some weeks rather relaxing, but it does also make them a lot more desirable than other weeks. Another possible reason for the removal of this is due to the loss of the Heart of Azeroth, because every perseverance you collect, which is those little diamonds that increases your stamina, also increases threat generation for tanks. This could make Skittish a lot more difficult, hence the possible reason for its removal. However, I feel this would have also made it more fun and challenging for tanks. The other affix removal I mentioned was teaming. Now, I have a bit of a love-hate with teaming. Some weeks it was amazing, others it was absolutely terrible. It can make a dungeon be so easy if the affixes aligned, but it could also make them a complete nightmare, creating weeks you just didn't want to go anywhere near. I think the reason for the removal of this is quite simple. Most likely, the dungeons just aren't set up to have extra adds. Having them would possibly make it too hard, and taking some out of the baseline dungeons to accommodate for when teaming weeks come could make it too easy on any other week than teaming. The other reason, of course, could be the new AoE cap that's impacting a lot of classes quite a bit, and would just make things like teaming too difficult to deal with. Okay, so that's the affixes that are being removed. There's also a couple of them that are being changed. These are Volcanic and Bursting. So how exactly are they changing? Well, to start off with, both of them now have flat damage values, rather than dealing damage based on the percentage of the player's health. Volcanic now deals fire damage, which is quite interesting, and I wonder if they were actually considering putting this into BFA originally, seeing how there are fire resistance braces in Toldagor. But who knows. The other change to Volcanic is that it now knocks players back. This could be quite an interesting new mechanic if it allows players to get creative with it, like using it to skip certain areas in dungeons. As for Bursting, this is now classified as shadow damage, and it's also a magic debuff. This means we can all rejoice, as it can actually be dispelled by all healers. This could even somewhat turn this into a bit of a null affix if you have a priest who can master spell. Providing their timing was good, if you were to AoE a pack down, they could actually remove Bursting as soon as it went on everyone. Due to these affixes dealing baseline damage now, it does also mean that they will scale with key level. Tackling these affixes at higher levels could be pretty tough, as they could end up becoming near one-shot mechanics. So, that wraps it up for all of the affixes. However, there is also one new addition or change, depending on how you look at it, coming to Shadowlands. It's called the Great Vault. So, way back, Eon talked about giving the players extra choices within their Mythic Plus weekly chests. Well, this is Blizzard's final iteration of that. There is also a raiding and PvP aspect to it, which I will briefly mention about in a moment. How does it function for Mythic Plus though? Well, if you complete a certain amount of Mythic Plus dungeons a week, you unlock multiple choices for loot for your weekly chest. So the first tier is one dungeon. So this will act the same as normal weekly chests. If you only want to do one key for your weekly, then feel free to go ahead. This will be based off of your highest Mythic Plus done. The next two tiers were originally to complete 5 dungeons and 15 dungeons, although Blizzard did change this down to 4 and 10, most likely after a lot of people in the community complained it was too high, which I can kind of understand. The way these work is slightly different though, as their reward is based off the level of dungeon you did for that bracket. For example, for the 4 dungeon tier, if you did a plus 15 and 3 plus 2s, then your second choice will be equal to that of a plus 2 reward. So that means if you'd like 3 plus 15 choices to choose from, you'll have to do 10 plus 15s per week. As for the raiding and PvP aspects of the chest, their respective tiers are based on bosses down for raiding, as well as the difficulty you killed them on. So killing 3 bosses on Mythic and a further 7 on Normal will net you 1 Mythic choice and 2 normal choices. And Conquest earned for the PvP chest, which I believe still goes based on your highest rating achieved in the week. So that's everything. I hope this helped to inform some of you and keep you all up to date. Thank you for watching, and until the next time, farewell!